Hey guys, we're live. It's a little after 7. I'm late because we had to have some good dinner with my family. That's the most important thing in the world. And tonight we're going to talk about reverse pattern camshafts. If you haven't taken a look, take a look at the video that I just posted today where we compared a single pattern cam to a dual pattern cam to another dual pattern cam, which is a reverse pattern cam. What we mean by that is a single pattern cam has the same intake and exhaust duration in this case. You can also have the same intake and exhaust lift, but a dual pattern cam has a different intake and exhaust pattern. Typically, it has more exhaust duration than it has intake duration. And on the reverse pattern camshaft, it has more intake duration than exhaust. So if you haven't taken a look at that video, check it out. But we wanted to talk a little bit about it because there were a lot of comments and a lot of interesting stuff that people were saying about it. And I wanted to cover it in a little bit more detail here for the guys. Yeah, Tim, what's up? I want to talk a little bit more about that tonight so that you guys can get some more insight, because I've done a lot more testing on this, and it's stuff that I didn't cover in that video that I loaded up today. So here are some comments that people made about this test. So if you haven't seen the test, I compared a single pattern cam to a typical dual pattern cam and then to a basically reverse pattern camshaft to show people what they do. And I said in the video that I've never had any test that I've run, and we've run it on various different applications, where a reverse pattern cam that has less exhaust duration than it has intake duration, I've never had that work. I've never had it make more power compared to any of the other cams. I don't typically go with a single pattern cam either. Usually the camshafts that we run that seem to make the most power are more traditional dual pattern cam. Somebody also brought up, so we'll go over a few things. Some people brought up the 4 pattern camshaft, and the reason that they introduced that is kind of the idea was to offset what happens on a typical single plane manifold. When you look at a single plane manifold, whether it's on a Ford or Chevy or whatever, usually has different length runners. So the outer runners, because the runners all have to merge into the center to mount a carburetor, the outer runners are long and then the inner runners are short. What they're trying to do with a 4 pattern camshaft is to try to equalize, power production, or kind of crush the intake manifold with the camshaft. And while I love that they do that, and that's a valiant effort, it doesn't change what the manifold does. So it does not cure the problem. It doesn't cure distribution. It doesn't cure the different effective operating ranges of the intake manifold. It just doesn't do that. Trying to fix the intake manifold with a camshaft is not the way to go. So a 4 pattern camshaft is not ideal either. But now we can go back to the reverse pattern camshaft. A lot of guys, if you take a look at camshafts for turbo offerings, a lot of times you'll see this where they have less exhaust duration than intake duration. And again, I like to tailor my stuff to like 95% of the people out there. And for the vast majority of us, that's not effective, because the camshaft that makes the most power NA will also make the most power under boost. And this is certainly the case, like I said, for 95% of us that have a turbo that kind of ultimately limits how much power we can make. Not very many of us are building pro mod motors where we're trying to extract the absolute maximum amount of something, in which case you probably would do a custom camshaft. Or in situations like I mentioned in the video, where you have, for a lot of class racers, okay, you can only use this turbo. Okay, so you have that turbo, you're trying to maximize everything that you can get out of turbo. A lot of times those guys will run into situations where they reach the maximum flow limit of the hot side before the cold side, or the cold side before the hot side. Then they're trying to juggle the adjustment between boost pressure and back pressure, and they're trying to eke every little bit out of that combination that they can. In that case, there are some times when it's possible that juggling these cam figures can extract more power. But again, for 95% of us, if you go by the rule, the golden rule, that if it makes more power NA, it will make more power under boost, that works very well. Now, here's an interesting thing that a lot of guys brought up, and I wanted to talk about a little bit because I've also done testing on this. So a lot of guys brought up the fact that you need to test like a reverse pattern camshaft with the right set of cylinder heads, or right cylinder head in the case of a 4-cylinder or an inline 6-cylinder. So you need to, what they're talking about is the intake to exhaust flow relationship. So if you flow the intake and you flow the exhaust, you want to have a typical dual pattern cam. The reason that they have a lot more exhaust duration is, this is the explanation that they will give you, is because the exhaust only flows about anywhere from 60 to 75% of what the intake flows. So what they're trying to do is crutch that basically again with cam duration and sometimes cam lift if you adjust both of those. We only did on the test that I did that I posted today. We didn't change the lift. The lift stayed was a single pattern on the lift, but a dual pattern on the duration. Now, obviously, you can change both of those. But so that's what they're trying to do. So if you have a cylinder head that has a poor intake to exhaust flow relationship, then the theory is that it will make better power with a camshaft that has more exhaust duration. So that flow relationship is kind of a critical element. And a lot of guys brought that up. Here's what I can tell you about that. We've run various different camshafts with various different cylinder heads with various different flow relationships. And the one that really comes to mind, we've done this on big blocks and small blocks and all kinds of stuff. But if you look at the test and then look at the video that's up, you can kind of get an idea what's going on here. So if you look at the test where I did the cathedral port versus rec port camshafts and cylinder heads, you'll get a pretty good idea of what's going on here. And this is why I don't agree with the fact that the intake to exhaust flow relationship on the cylinder head has that big of an effect on your cam choice. And I know lots of guys will argue with me, but it's because they haven't done a lot of testing. And here's what I'll tell you is I've tested this over and over again. And what a lot of guys will do is they'll put together a motor, and they're really sharp guys that are doing this. So they'll put together a motor, they'll look at the cylinder head, they'll go, okay, look, I've got a really good head like an airflow research head, and I've got the exhaust flows 80% or more of what the intake flows. So I can use something closer to a single pattern cam. They'll put the single pattern cam in. It will go in the motor will go together. They'll go in the dyno and it will make good power. The problem is that they never compared it to anything. They'll say, look, I did this and it works. Yeah, but we don't know if it works compared to something else. That's why I like doing back-to-back tests. So to find out if the intake to exhaust flow relationship of the cylinder head works better or worse with another kind of camshaft, you would have to test that. And to test that, you would have to run multiple cams on that head. And then you would also have to do, and this is something that nobody does except I've done it, is you also have to run all of those camshafts with another cylinder head that has a different intake to exhaust flow relationship to see how the cams react to both of them. Because if you don't know what they do on both of them, you only know what they do on one of them. All you can say is, hey, I did a cam change with this motor, with this head, and it did something. That's not the same as knowing what the cam does with intake to exhaust flow relationship. Yeah, Julius, that's not the same thing as knowing. So that's why it's very difficult. So that's why when I did, if you take a look at the video, that's why I did the test that I did. So I ran a cathedral port head and a rec port head. And then I also ran with both of those heads, a cathedral port cam and a rec port cam. So if you're not familiar, a rec port cam basically has a lot more exhaust duration than the cathedral port cam does. They both have the same intake duration. They both have the same lift. They both have the same lobe separation angle, but they had a big difference in exhaust flow or not in a big difference in exhaust duration. So here's what I did. I ran both of those cams on both of those heads. And do you think that one of those cams all of a sudden magically, like, did the cathedral port cam make the cathedral port head magically work better than the rec port head? No, that's not what happened. So both of the cams did exactly the same thing on both of the motors. I mean, they made a little bit different power because the head flow is different. You got one head that flows 250 and then one head that flows 315. The one that flows 315 is going to make more power, and that's exactly what happened. But the relative difference between the two cams were the same with both heads. So we have a big disparity, not just in flow, but we had a big disparity in intake to exhaust flow relationship between those two heads. But the cams did the same thing, even though one was favored to work better on one kind of head. That's why this intake to exhaust flow relationship, I don't think, tells me that one kind of camshaft is going to work better with that head, or that head needs a specific kind of camshaft. That's why I don't think on this test where I ran this reverse pattern cam that there's necessarily a head where that camshaft will work better. So in all the testing I've done, it doesn't say that. Now, I'm open to that actually happening, and I'd like for somebody to show me some actual data. But unfortunately, what people normally show me is not data. They show me, oh, look, I did this motor and I did this cam and this head and it worked. Okay, but it worked compared to what? That's not data to me. That's a dyno test. That's like people bragging the fact that they test. I dyno test everything. Well, putting a car on a chassis dyno and running it and tuning it is not doing the same thing. That's not doing any kind of back-to-back test. That's what we call a baseline. And then you change the heads, and then you change the cam, and then you change the intake, and then you do all the stuff that it takes to actually find out a bunch of data. So that's why I don't think the reverse pattern cam, again, for 95% of us, I don't think that it's a good idea. That being said, we have run reverse pattern cams, and like on the big block, we ran a reverse pattern cam that was just a reverse pattern on the intake. So it had less exhaust lift than it had intake lift, and that's fairly common. But it had more exhaust duration than it had intake duration. So it was skewed the other way on the duration, and you can do both of those. The one area where I have seen less exhaust duration possibly work is on 4-valve motors. Now, if you look at some of the 4-valve cam offerings, if you look at Coyote stuff or Honda stuff, that's not unusual. So I'm not saying that it's not possible. I'm just telling you in the other stuff that I've done in small block Chevys, small block Fords, big block Chevys, and also the LS, obviously, it did not work out that way and hasn't in any of the testing. But on the 4-valve stuff, that might be the exception. So let me know what you guys think. If you guys have seen any testing or have done any testing where you guys have found out whether that stuff works. This all happened by accident, by the way, because when I was doing this testing early on with the guys from Crane on these direct fit camshafts, it was kind of cool. And as I mentioned in the video, I just said, hey, look, we have this cam, we have this cam. The one that's missing is this other cam. And they're like, yeah, but that's not going to work very well. I'm like, I know, but the reason that we do stuff that doesn't work is so that we can demonstrate that this did this and this did this and this did this. And so we can draw this line and go, hey, we went from here to here to here. And if you just tell them, oh, this will probably do this, it's not as good as telling them, yes, this will do this. And not only will it do this, it actually did this. So it's very important. Yo, Ted, what's up? Ted, if you're going to deposit money or you're going to, super chats is awesome. Make sure you ask a question. Carl's Jr. Are the mother thumper cams by comp cams reverse pattern? Not normally. Usually the mother thumper cams are way the other way. So they have way more exhaust duration than they have intake duration. And they usually have tight lobe separation angles, which gives them the chop. Everybody wants the chop. They want the 3/4 race cam. And that's what those do. And I remember talking to Billy from Comp Cams when they introduced those. We're like, dude, but you're not doing these for power. He's like, nope, we're doing them because people want this kind of sound from a cam. And I thought, because I come from a dyno background, I thought that was foolish of them. Little did I realize that I should have gone onto YouTube or onto Facebook or on Instagram and looked at all the millions of idle videos that people have because they want to hear that sound. And, God bless them, that you have what you like, and that's awesome. And it's amazing that people buy a camshaft so that it sounds like they have a camshaft. That's kind of cool. I mean, I look back and think, well, we used to turn the air cleaner lid over on the Quadrajet so it sounded cool. And I'd known more than one guy that's pulled a plug wire so that his car had the chop. That's the cheap way not to buy a camshaft, is just pull the plug wire. Yeah, Tim, they all had 502 lift just because they were direct fit cams so that they could work with basically the factory springs. Okay, so now that I've stood up on my soapbox and talked about all this reverse pattern cam stuff. And the thing is, a lot of guys had asked, obviously, since we ran these NA, okay, but what would it do under boost? These are all turbo cams. You need to run it with a turbo. But what do you think is going to happen, honestly? If you guys have seen enough of my testing that if we have a camshaft, like if we have an LS9 and it makes more power at top and less at the bottom, when we add boost to that, it still looks like that. It's the same curve. It just has now it has boost and it's just magnified. Everything is elevated and multiplied. That's what happens. And that's exactly what I think is going to happen here, unless we get to that last little 1 or 2% of people that have weird combinations where this would come in handy. Or like I said, possibly on a 4-valve motor. Dan wants to know how you pick the correct throttle body size for any motor. Well, it's easy for you to determine whether your throttle body is big enough if you put a vacuum line and hook a vacuum gauge up between the throttle body and, in this case, between the throttle body and the supercharger, if you have vacuum there at wide open throttle, it's going to be most prevalent at the top of the RPM range where flow is the greatest. Look for vacuum. If you have vacuum there, you need a bigger throttle body, because if you have vacuum there, you are losing boost, because vacuum in front of the throttle body will equate to more boost if you can get rid of that vacuum. So it's a good way to check and see what your throttle body size is. Sinister Silverado, I'm cheap. I'm buying the Summit cam. The Summit cams work well. There's lots of good stuff out there. I mean, if you get a Summit cam that has this intake and exhaust duration, and you get a BTR or Texas Speed or Comp Cam and has that same intake and exhaust duration, the cam's going to do the same thing. The cam doesn't know whose name is on it, really. Jason says my TSP 239 6-liter cam sounds great and has a solid 800 RPM idle. So it must be a stick car, I'm assuming. Jake, I'm building a 350 Vortec with ported stock heads and a draw-through turbo from a 12-valve Cummins and a Q-Jet carburetor. Let me know how that works. I want to know if that turbo will actually seal up as a draw-through application. That's a difficult thing. Inyuko, I have a TSP 238 242 cam. That's a good size cam. 775 idle. See, he's responding to the 800 idle. So really, the first liar does not stand a chance. Yes, Luis, my head does shine with knowledge. At least it's shiny. It's so shiny. Yes, I'm quoting Moana. Henry wants to know, do 109 lobe center help for back pressure on the turbo better than AN? I don't know what AN is, since the valve opens early. I don't understand the whole question. So maybe if you can rephrase it, I can answer. 190-degree lobe separation angle, and I don't think you're talking about that, would be pretty tight, would be tighter than you would want for a turbo combination, probably. That hurts idle, and it does make more mid-range and possibly power everywhere if you can tighten that up. Depends on what RPM range you're running. Tim says the only thing that really expensive cams are good for is higher RPM. The high-tech guys can spin-tron their valve train. You would think that that's the case. A lot of them don't. Tronics 14, can I use 150 gallon per hour mechanical fuel pump for a 302 GT45 blow-through carb and boost reference regular setup? Do I need an electric fuel pump? I've seen guys boost reference mechanical pumps as long as the diaphragm will hold together to do that. You just want to make sure that you have boost pressure plus whatever the fuel pressure is going to the carburetor, as long as the pump can maintain that. Otherwise, you need a different, an electric fuel pump works too. Oh, Jake, you wanted to know what cam you should use on your 350 Vortec. Are you using a GT45 turbo? If you are, and you're not looking for a ton of power, something like the 274 cam that we use in the small block Fords. So something in the 224, 232 range, or 220, 230, right in that range. And if it's a Vortec head, low lift. So unless you're going to machine it for the right springs and retainer to seal clearance. Russell wants to know what the best turbo cam is for a Gen 3 Hemi. Just put a cam in it. All you need to do is put a good cam in it. Take a look at the videos I have up. We did some cam stuff on early Hemis. There's also a cam test on a later Hemi, and you can see what kind of gains you get from that. And then the boost just multiplies that. So either one of those cams that we tested, and actually we've tested multiple cams, the new ones that Comp has out work really well. Julius from Down Under. Julius wants to know what would happen if I mounted my throttle body in front of the turbo at the intake manifold would response increase. I don't think response would increase. I don't think that that would affect turbo response. What it would do, though, is make the throttle body size much more critical, because if you're blowing through it, you can artificially increase the flow rate of the throttle body because it flows a lot more under pressure than it does under vacuum. So I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend blowing through the throttle body. It would be much better. Uh, Mr. Alexis Jones, XER, LSL, LSR, LSK, and XFI hydraulic roller lobes. What's the difference? Usually the ramp rate for those things, and then the attending stability at RPM. Uh, Again, if you're just building a street motor or even a semi-race motor, there's a lot of those profiles. Or I don't know if why you're wanting to do a custom cam profile, unless you're really, really looking for big power. There's so much power that can be made with something that's just ready to go and off the shelf. And also that usually, like Tim was saying, a lot of guys have done stability tests. So if you're looking to run something at 8,000 or 8,500 RPM, there's already hydraulic roller stuff that will allow you to do that, and you don't need a custom cam profile with those lobes. Sinister Silverado is in for 327. I hope that means you're a small block Chevy guy, and not just a small block Chevy guy, but a 327 small block Chevy guy. Richard Coleman wants to know, how can you spec a cam? If you just tell me what your motor is and how much power you want to make, and whether it's turbocharged or NA or whatever, there's a lot, because I've run cams for the last 25 years. I can tell you what cam to put in that will make the thing that you want it to do. Hayden, I'm building an 11-to-1 383 with a Comp XR294. That's a good size cam. I need a good set of out-of-the-box iron heads, hoping for 500 horsepower. Why would you want to use an iron head? There's lots of cheap aluminum heads. It would be a much better way to go. But Dart and World Products have iron heads, or you could also go with a factory, or even Skog and Dickey or these other guys have iron Vortec heads, which would work fairly well. Although, again, I don't know why you put an iron head on it. Silverado wants to know, bolt-on or supercharger for keeping daily. If you can, that's more of a price thing. A supercharger will add more than the bolt-ons will. You can get a lot of power from that. Either way, I would do some kind of cam in it, because the supercharger will respond. So if you do like a mild truck cam, a stage 1 or stage 2 truck cam, and then put a blower on it, so you do cam springs and a blower, cam springs and boost, cures everything, obviously. So whether it's a turbo or a supercharger, that all works good. Or you could just put the supercharger on with the stock cam, and that works also good. Nick Nasty wants to see a supercharger suited out, a 2.1 Kenny Bell, a 2.8 Whipple. If you take a look at the 464 valve test I did with all the blowers and turbos and everything, you kind of see what's going on there. A Roots blower is low man on the totem pole. The twin screw is better than a Roots. It usually has more capacity, a lower charge temperature, less parasitic loss associated with driving the blower. It will make more power per pound of boost. A centrifugal does very well because they kind of have a turbo impeller. They're fairly efficient, but they don't have the same response rate as a positive displacement. So it has a kind of rising boost curve. Turbo is the best out of all of them because it makes more. It doesn't have the response rate of either of the positive displacement blowers, but it'll have more average power production, and it'll make more power per pound of boost because it doesn't have the parasitic losses associated with driving the blower. Durham Harse, $2. Yeah, $2 Chuck. 2.96 LS, 3.8 forged piston, 6.3 inch rods, 7875 DSR. That's a good combination. That will work good. The 6300 rod. Sika wants to know, I think it's Sika. Can I compensate on a big cam with losses down low with a bigger stall? Yeah, that's what most people do. If you put a cam in it that's has the chop, usually they put a higher stall speed on it. Stacy is testing a twin 3.5 EcoBoost twin 3.5 EcoBoost turbos with a single 76 on a K24A2. Nice. On a Honda Insight. Oh, see, that's really cool. A K-swap Honda Insight is awesome. We want to run one of those at Bonneville for a long time. And the twin 3.5 EcoBoost turbos should make pretty good power, I would think. Getting twins to work on a 4-cylinder can be a little bit more difficult, and a single 76 will make a lot of power. That's probably the turbo size that we will run 76, 78-ish on the K series that we're doing to try to make lots of power. Stacy, thanks again for the $5. I have not run those two. I don't know what size those twin 3.5 EcoBoost turbos are. I don't know what they're capable of. So it would just be a guess. A single 76, we know if it's the right kind of 76, that could be a 1200 horsepower turbo. I don't know that the K24A2 that you have will get there if it has the internals and all the stuff that it needs. But you can certainly make 4-digit power. Yeah, see, Tim said that those EcoBoost turbos are kind of small. 76, like I said, a 76 can be anything from the T76 that we use from CX Racing, which is a 700 horsepower turbo, all the way up to 76 millimeter stuff, like real Garrett stuff that can be 12 or 1300 horsepower. Let's see if I can focus power. Wow. By the Life Racing, how quickly will leaded fuel ruin O2 sensors? We run race gas a lot, leaded race gas on at Westech, and the sensors last pretty long. It won't happen overnight. It won't happen really quick if that's what you're worried about. And then what we do is we run the race gas, and then we'll run the sensor again with like unleaded pump 91, and that seems to get them to last a little bit longer. Ryan wants to know what makes a blower cam different than an NA cam. I can give you a rough idea of what they're trying to do, like with a positive displacement blower cam. The difference between a centrifugal blower cam and an NA cam is very minimal, actually. But what they're trying to do on a positive displacement blower cam, like the factory LS9 cam is a good example. They soften the bottom end. They have a really wide LSA. They also did that for idle quality and stuff on the LS9 camshaft. But what they're trying to do is a roots blower is good for providing instant boost and good throttle response and good low and mid-range power, but it's not that great for top end. So what they're trying to do is crutch the camshaft with having more top end, and they do that with the wider LSA, and they've got a big, like in the case of the LS9 and other positive displacement blower cams from other manufacturers, they have a big spread between the intake duration and exhaust duration. So they have lots of exhaust duration, a wide LSA compared to an NA cam, and they're trying to crutch the top of the RPM range with the camshaft where the blower is working on the bottom part of it. For me, I would just pick an NA cam and put that in there and have all of it. Richard Coleman, why do I think I have a question here that I missed from you? I'm scrolling back to try to find. Oh, so Richard Coleman, you want to know how you can actually verify that the cam is what you ordered, or you can put it on a cam doctor is one way to do that. And I don't think that this is really something to be concerned with. I think if one of the big cam manufacturers sell you a cam, they have all of those cams ground together. So they're going to be what they say they are. We've never tested a cam and had it not be what they said it was, because if you put it in and it doesn't work, that's bad for them. So I don't know why you would be that concerned, but one way to test it is a cam doctor. Julius wants to know, where should I mount my O2 sensor for the single rear mount turbo, or should I not bother and use 8 EGT sensors? I would rather have an O2 sensor than EGT sensors, because EGT sensors tell you temperature, and that's not the same as telling you air fuel. We mount our O2 sensor after the turbo in the what most people call a downpipe. For us, it's just the exhaust. We mount it in that after the turbo. Sinister Silverado, what turbo should I use on a Z71 5.3? I just want more torque for towing. You can use something small. A GT35 could be around 500 horsepower, maybe 600. A GT45 could be 700 or 800. So it depends on where you want, what kind of power you want. A GT35, unless you can find one that has a really big housing, a hot side, it's probably going to be a little restrictive. I would be worried about on that 5.3 as a single. Unless it's just bone stock and you're looking for another 100 or 150 foot-pounds. Or there are other turbos that are not those two. Those are just the cheap ones that we constantly mention. There are more expensive ones, like good Garrett turbos, that you could get that would be sized in between those. James wants to know, when you degree cams, how out of time do you usually see? Now, I don't degree a lot of the LS cams. We just put them in dot to dot. And the reason that I do that, one, I don't want to degree the cams because when I change cams, sometimes I change 20 or 30 camshafts on the same motor. So I'm not going to degree everything. The other reason, and the excuse that I use for not doing that, is that the way that I put them in is the way that you guys would be putting them in. Not very many people degree the cams. Only engine builders that are putting the motor together one time usually do that, because they want to make sure that it's in exactly where it is, and they adjust it. And although I never see any of those people adjusting it on the dyno to find out if the place where they put it in is actually the most powerful place, it gives them the power curve that they want. They just put it in and degree it and assume that that's right. The other part of your question is, I have seen factory cams and aftermarket cams, but more on like the 4-valve and 2-valve Ford stuff. I have seen those cams be off side to side by quite a bit, by 9 or 10 degrees. And that's a lot. So we did, and I only did that because John Mahovitz told me, he said, hey, you should probably check those cams. It would be interesting for you to test those. And we did check them. And the cams that we tested, like I said, were 9 or 10 degrees off, different from one side to the other. So we did a test where we put the cams back where they're supposed to be. And in this case, we did pick up power. So it was worth it on that application. Brad says, I don't see any issues running them pre-turbo. Yeah, if you can do that. We just don't normally do that on stuff where it gets really hot. But on a remote setup, you're not going to have as much exhaust heat. Sika wants to know, should I ditch 317s on a 6-liter? No, you don't have to. I know that I've put out lots of videos where I say the 706 heads are so much better than the 317 heads, and a lot of guys took that personally. But the thing is, with any stock head on an LS, the turbo limits the amount of power that you can make. So if you have a 1,000 horsepower turbo with a 317 head and a cam and springs, you can make 1,000 horsepower. In fact, if I were doing it for a street motor and I was trying to do it on 91 octane, I probably would run 317 heads, because I still, and even though I haven't tested it, I still tend to think that with the lower compression, you can get a combination of more boost and timing with the low compression than you can with the higher compression stuff, and ultimately make as much or more power with the 317 head as you can with the 706 head, if octane is the limiting thing. Derek wants to know, where would you expect peak power on a 225, 227, 115 LSA cam on a 427 with twin 6266s? You didn't tell me what head's on there and what intake is on there. That's going to help determine it. But a 225 cam and a 427 is not going to make a lot of high RPM power unless you have a single plane intake and really big heads on it. And you'd have to have lots of lift in that cam too for it to make a lot of power at a higher RPM, or you'd have to have a rising boost curve, which will help things also. Dude, do I have guys from Russia? Because that would be awesome. I was just talking about that tonight. We were talking about that at the dinner table with my kids, and I was telling them how I thought it would be awesome to have somebody from Russia. I didn't know if I had, I didn't know if I had fans there. Oh, a lot of. I would love to have a lot. I think that would be cool. Because that's the thing is car guys all around the world are just car guys. They may speak different languages and think different things and talk in different ways or whatever, but car guys are car guys. So, um, let's see. COC car dude. CO car dude. This channel is awesome. Would you recommend doing a 5.2 or a 5 liter with a Gen 1? A Gen 1 what? You got to tell me what that is. Is it a Coyote? Is it a... If it is a Coyote, I wouldn't do a 5.2. I would do a 5 liter. Otherwise, I don't know what else would be a 5.2 other than a Dodge Magnum, maybe. Rocky wants to know if I've done any testing with the same lift and duration cams, but with different valve opening events. So we're going to change the LSA. Is that what we're doing? Go for broke. I haven't done decap injectors except long ago. We did some that were Bosch injectors. And I have, as I've said before in the videos, I've done the Snake Eater performance injectors, which I think are decapped injectors. I can't be sure of that, though. Bruiser, no, I have not started making cams. I have a whole bunch of test cams that I might be getting rid of. But if I do, I will let people know. Oh, the Coyote. I wouldn't do a 5.2 Coyote. I would do a 5 liter. Fishing up a storm, what would be the best power adder for my 302 Mustang? I have GT40 heads and GT40 intake along with the E303 cam. I ran a Vortec on mine for a long time. Torque Storm's good. A turbo will make the most power of anything that you can do per pound of boost. The Gen 1 Coyote, I'd do a 5 liter, especially if you're going to run boost. And you can make lots of power even at the stock displacement. By the Life Racing, 500 horsepower on a 462 valve stock heads with a single turbo. What size turbo? Yeah, that's really easy. A GT45 will do that without any problem. LT1 350, 92 to 97 turbo. We will be running LT1 stuff coming up. I just got off the phone with Jim Hall from TPIS, and he's sending out the tune port manifold for the L99, the little 4.3 liter. I'm also going to run an LT1. We'll do a bunch of mods on that. I'm going to put a torque storm on it, although I don't know if we'll run a turbo on any of them. Yes, I'm familiar that the new 5.2 in the Shelby was a 5.2, but I still would do a 5 liter. This is a good question. I don't know the answer to it. What's the safe horsepower limit for a stock L83 boosted? I haven't run boost on mine, so I don't really know. I think there are guys out there doing it and making a lot of power with them, so I would assume that it's going to be similar to LS stuff. B-Rid, how is a turbo map made? Could it be one made for budget turbos? They actually have to test the turbo to do that, and it's fairly sophisticated machinery to do that, and that's why guys don't do it with cheap turbos, because it's expensive. Jason, $4.99. Would love to see a comprehensive history of Holdner video to learn all about my history. I don't think anybody wants to learn. I mean, I tell you guys stuff all the time when I'm doing live feeds about stuff that I've raced and engines that I've built and that kind of stuff. But I don't think anybody would want to sit for an hour or two and listen to me talk about myself. Mr. 532, I have a 532 big block Ford. Would twin 88 still have high back pressure? No. Twin 88s on a 532 would be fine. Mr. 6 liter, we run synthetic oil on almost all the LS stuff, except sometimes when I just get them out of the wrecking yard, I usually put cheap oil in them just to make sure that they're going to work. And then we'll switch over to, usually it's a 1030 synthetic, and we use Lucas because they're one of the supporters of the guys over at Westech. So we use that, but there's lots of good oils out there. What's the safe horsepower limit for a boosted LS1 with stock ring gap? I don't know. You can go right up until it breaks because you don't know what that stock ring gap is. That's the problem, is you don't know if it's 15 or if it's 25. And it's not gap versus boost, it's gap versus temperature. And we always have that question. You can run 7 pounds for a half an hour and probably blow it up. You can run 15 pounds for 2 or 3 seconds and it probably won't get hurt. Or it might. That's the problem with ring gap, is you don't know. Peter Lyon, small block Chevy with a good set of aluminum heads, 7/16 screw and studs. What size cam would you start to go with a stud girdle on it? The stud girdle really is less about the camshaft than it is about for me, than it is about the valve spring stuff. It's valve spring and RPM. So as you go up in those things, a stud girdle is a good idea. But we've run lots of stuff at fairly high RPM and fairly high spring rates. And we're talking about 350 pounds of seat pressure. And, I don't know what that's going to be open, 700 or 800 or something, and not run stud girdles on it. But they're a good idea. Hayden wants to hear the history. A Volga V12 coupe? I want to hear more about that thing. Admiral Peck, what would be a good starter turbo brand? Look at the guys from Max Speeding just sent me stuff, and all the turbos that you get they all come from the same place, I think. And if not, they come from lots of different factories that are doing the same thing. Because if you look at a Max Speeding turbo and a CX Racing and a DNA, they all look surprisingly similar. So just get the size that you want. And then there's lots of places to buy them that are fairly inexpensive. Fishing up a storm, your power adder. Did we answer that? Vortec or a turbo? Or a Pro Charger or a Torque Storm? Tyler wants to know, how old were you when you first turned the key of a motor you put together? The first motor that I had to work on, that I had to build, I had to rebuild, was in a 1970 and a half split bumper RS Camaro. It was my first car, because a ring snapped on it and twisted, and then just wore its way through the bore of the cylinder. And we had to, my stepdad helped me build my first motor. And so I had to learn how to do a ridge reamer. We had to learn how to hone it and bore it and then put it all back together. Same thing with the trans. He helped me do my first shift kit, which was the first real cool upgrade that I did. We put a shift kit in the Turbo 350. So when you take the pan down and take the separator plate, and then all the magic balls and springs and everything fall out. So we learned how to do that, which was very cool. Bubba wants to know, what can you mill the head and the intake still fit? I think a lot of guys go at least 30 on an LY6. Andrew wants to know how much I can bench press. A lot less than before COVID started. I haven't been to the gym since, I don't know, March probably. At what horsepower have you seen iron LS blocks fail? Have you not? I can't believe you're on here listening to a live feed and you haven't seen all the Big Bang stuff. You should know all the Big Bang motors by heart. The farthest that we've taken one of the iron blocks, and it was a 6-liter LY6 and it's still alive, was 1,543 horsepower. So the block is not going to be an issue. An iron LS block is not going to be an issue.
Terry said Speed Pro had a cam that had no overlap. There's lots of cams that have no overlap. In fact, there's lots of cams that have negative overlap. I'm sure if you look at the cams that we ran, these mild cams, they probably have negative overlap. But that's okay. And the thing is, and this is one of the questions I had for Brian Tooley when I do the interview, is on a turbo motor, a lot of guys think that the turbo, because it has boost, that during overlap, and overlap is when the intake and exhaust valve are both open, that all of that wonderful boost just blows right out through the through the combustion chamber and out the exhaust. Well, that can't happen. And the reason that can't happen, because typically on a turbo motor, the back pressure is almost always higher than the boost pressure. It's at least even, and it's almost always higher. So if something were to blow through, it would blow through the other way. And that actually doesn't happen either, because these events happen very fast. On a supercharged application, we have seen where you get what a lot of guys call blowdown. So when the valves are open, you have overlap. It blows through. And if you don't, because we retard the timing in these combinations, in these boosted combinations, you get what we call the Bunsen burner effect. So it's like burning out in the exhaust. And so that you cure that by putting more timing in it or changing the cam timing also, so that you can minimize that. And we've played with that a lot, and it's kind of cool stuff. Michael wants me to explain a turbo flow pressure chart. I'm going to do a compressor map video, and we will explain all of that stuff. And I'll explain to you why a compressor map for 95% of us is next to useless. Not next to useless. It's very helpful, but why most of us aren't where the efficiency island is when we're running these turbos. No, the iron blocks have not failed me. I've not broken iron block. Now, I don't think that I would go out and try to run these LS Big Bang motors. A lot of guys are not getting what I'm talking about when we do these Big Bang motors. On these Big Bang motors, what I'm trying to find out is what is the breaking point. So just the fact that we made 1,500 horsepower or more on the 6-liter doesn't mean that I would try to go out and run it at 1,500 horsepower, because I don't think that that's a good idea. I don't know how many passes you could make at 1,500 horsepower, although that motor's still alive and has made lots and lots of passes at 1,000. It's just as you go up, you start limiting the number of cycles that the motor can do at that level until you reach the one where it can only do one, and then it breaks. And so as you go from that high ceiling point of it can only do one and then it's going to break, and like the 1,000 horsepower level where it can do lots and lots, the number that you can make in between there diminishes, and it diminishes fairly rapidly as you get closer to this point. So I don't know how many you could run at that point, and I don't know where you would break the block. I still think on a Big Bang motor, like with a stock bottom end, we're going to break a Gen 4 rod or a piston before we break the block. And guys that are running at these 1,500 horsepower and up levels usually do it with a better block. And they can go out, you can go out and make runs there, and lots of guys have, but guys that are really seriously racing and going into that upper echelon of power from 1,500 to 2,000 horsepower, they're usually doing it with a block that is sturdier and with the right kind of crankshaft and all of that stuff. Bruiser Cruiser Production, stock Gen 353 with a turbo 400, truck intake, gap rings, in a 2-wheel drive truck. What cam and turbo would you recommend? Budget friendly, mostly street, track every other weekend. Just tell me how much power you want to make, and that's what the GT45 is 700 horsepower. An S475 or a 7875 Gen 2 or 3 or 1 from CX Racing or from other people is about 1,000 horsepower turbo. So if either one of those will work for what you're doing. I wouldn't probably pick something smaller than that. But there are lots of good turbos that aren't those two that will also get you there. We just mentioned those two because they're very common, they're cheap, they're easy to buy, and they're readily available from lots of sources. Yeah, Mr. 6-liter, do a trans brake launch at 30 psi at 6,000 RPM on a Big Bang motor. I think that would be the one time that you could probably try that. Junkyard Digs, what's your favorite simple or budget engine setup? My favorite ones are junkyard motors. So whatever I can go get from the junkyard. We've talked about the 351. If I'm gonna go get a motor that I'm gonna run, a 351 short block and then the GT40 heads from the Explorer is a good combination. A GT40 combination from an Explorer as a 302 is also good. Any sort of LS is also good. Any junkyard motor, a small block Chevy that is a Vortec motor is good. A Vortec V6 is really good. Any of the LT1 stuff. My favorite stuff is junkyard stuff. The Michael wants to know, is a 351 Windsor Big Bang motor still live? No, you need to watch that video to the end, and you can see it came apart in spectacular fashion because we were doing dumb things with it. Russell said he's always been told that a stock head gasket blows on a Hemi due to the lack of head bolts. Well, the Hemi has the same thing that a Ford small block has, and the same thing that an LS has. It has the same number of head bolts. So guys went through this when we first started doing boosted Ford small blocks, when we were doing 5-liter Fords back in the day. Admiral, $5. Back in the day, they were saying, oh, what a small block Chevy has 16 head bolts or 15 or 11 or whatever the number is, and that the small block Fords only have 10. So the Chevy should have better sealing. Well, the number of head bolts doesn't determine the sealing. Like, especially in the case of the small block Ford, it was the deck thickness of the block, the fairly thin deck thickness. And guys were drilling them out. I'm going to drill and tap it for 1/2-inch studs because a 1/2-inch stud's a lot stronger than a 7/16 stud. Yeah, but you're still drilling and tapping into tinfoil, and it's going to distort the block when you do that. So it's usually not the number of studs that cause the sealing problem. Like if we can run 1,540 horsepower at 29 pounds of boost on the dyno with 10 head bolts, we did have good head studs because we had the 625 ARP stuff. We had a LS9 head gasket, so nothing special there. There was no receiver, no O-rings, nothing trick about it. So if everything is right, usually when guys blow head gaskets or lift the head, something else has gone wrong. And so I don't think it's the number of studs that are doing that. Stacy wants to know, on an LS2 with the BTR Torquer V2 cam, TBSS intake, all-wheel drive Astrovan, will a modded 4L65E hold up? I doubt it, especially if you're beating on it. Racer D wants to know, didn't you win the Engine Masters one time? I did not. I was one of the finalists when the one year that I went, and they unfortunately burned my motor down for me by not turning the water on. And then after that, it just went down and down and down in power. Do you think a 500 horsepower, 363-inch small block Ford spool twin 7875s? Yeah, for 1,500 horsepower? Yeah, it will. If you're only looking for 1,500, 7875s will do nearly 2,000. So you could go smaller on the turbos to get more response rate if you want that. But a 363 should spool those. You're going to have some stall converter in this, and you're going to be playing with that a little bit, but it will work. Jay Dunbar, $20, man. I'm going to be able to have some hydration later. Have you ever used anything from On3 Performance? I haven't, but I think that the On3 stuff is probably going to be really similar to the DNA GT45 that we use. They have different size turbos like the guys from VS and everybody else. I haven't used their stuff. I should probably contact them and see if they'll send something over. I have a 2013 Suburban 6-liter L96 and then a 6L90. Fuel economy is terrible, and looking for fuel economy improvements with additional power being welcome for towing. Well, having a turbo is probably not going to help your mileage, at least not while you're under boost. Cruise might help, but usually guys put turbos on not for fuel mileage. They put turbos on more for kind of power and towing power when you need it. And I would like to see the argument where guys are talking about, okay, I had to get in the gas less because I had boost and more torque. How much fuel were you using compared to having to have more throttle on an NA motor to get up the hills and stuff? that would kind of be an interesting thing. That would be a really difficult test, but it would be kind of cool though. Eric wants to know, what about a cross plane crank? Help it make more torque compared to a flat plane crank? It doesn't seem to add up mathematically. I don't think that the only time where I think the crank design will make a difference is maybe an exhaust pulsing for turbos. But again, I haven't verified that. If the displacement is the same and the compression is the same, I don't think you see much there. Unless there might be really sharp guys that can figure out what the pulsing would be for a twin scroll turbo and the right Y pipe and all of that, but that would be beyond me. I don't know how the a flat plane crank can make torque at higher RPM. Given the same displacement and cam timing and head and intake manifold and all that stuff, I just don't see how that's possible. It really sounds cool though. I'm getting ready to build this is Link 550. I'm getting ready to build a 408 stroker 360. Nice. A Magnum. Some dyno data on some Hughes engine roller cam would be pretty sweet. I don't have any. I was planning on building a 408 stroker for the 360 that I ran, that I have the video up on, but we ended up just putting that motor back in the van and driving it around, and I never got to building the 408, which I wanted to. So I don't have a lot of Dodge data for you. Mr. Misecast, having the near exact high mileage truck as I have, when might you consider building a new engine? I thought about it a lot. I'd like to put something together and just put it in there, just something kind of stock, maybe with the like a BTR torque cam or something like that. Something that's the thing that I'm worried about, not so much as the motor, because I had a Vortec supercharger kit for it also that we did a bunch of testing with. But I wanted to put that on. I'm just worried about the transmission. So I'm definitely going to have to, if I put more power in it, I'm sure that the transmission would be the next thing to go. Jason wants to know, and this is a good question, have you or do you plan to make a single scroll versus twin scroll turbo video? I am going to do that. I'm going to do some Y pipe testing with an open versus twin scroll turbos to find out if something really happens there. Hey, Richard, what do you think of a Camspec 510 lift, 310 duration with 112 LSA and a 5.7 liter LS1 or an LT1? I think that would work fine. I would like to see the duration at 50 so I can kind of compare the advertised duration and the 50 number. But that seems within the realm of what guys are using, because we've been going over a lot of cams with GM over at TPIS, and I've been going over a lot of stuff that he uses in the standard size LT1s in the 5.7s, because we're doing some stuff now for the little 4.3, and not a lot of guys have done stuff with those because nobody wants to hot rod them. Eric Lawrence, $4.99. What's up? Well, thanks for answering my question. Hey, I'll always be here the nights that I'm here working, and we'll always be here to answer the question. Michael, he just wants to buy some hydration. Remember, hydration is very important. Joyce wants to know, yes, need to know if you run a twin or single exhaust back to the GT 4508. Brad says pulse energy utilization gains on a twin scroll turbo is very real and very noticeable. Well, we'll see, because I'm building a couple of different Y-pipes. Admiral, $2. What's your multi-stage injection question? Ask away. Do I have to scroll back and look at it, or are you going to ask it again? Let me see. Admiral, I don't see the question. Did you answer? Did you ask me again? I see that you said that you had 36-pound injectors for stage 1 and then 120s for second stage, and you're bringing those in at 2,500 to 3,000 RPM. I don't think you'll need them that early, but I'm sure you had a different question than this. And I'm kind of scrolling back. Okay, Admiral, I'm not finding it, so make sure that you ask the question again so I can ask it. Here we go. What's a good rule of thumb for determining size and split? A lot of guys will go smaller and then bigger. A lot of guys also do the same size injector, as long as the total injector size will feed the kind of power output that you're talking about, and then work on the transition. When we did ours on our Bonneville car, on our turbo Bonneville car, we went up to about 75% of the primary injector and then brought the second injector in. We were doing the second injector not just because we needed multiple injectors because we couldn't get enough fuel from one. We could, but we were doing it because we positioned the injector higher in the runner to try to get more power. But we did most of it with the primary injector and then brought the other one in, and then you'll work a little bit on that transition. That kind of is the critical thing as you start ramping it in. But it's not terribly difficult as long as you're controlling basically two maps there. Oh, if you're shooting for 2,000 horsepower on meth, that's going to be a lot of fuel. Yeah, so you might not be staging them so much as just using one set for idle and initial stuff, and then both of them will start to be kind of all in. we did salute the Admiral. I did the captain salute. Yeah, 2,000 is beyond the stuff that I've tested. We've run some stuff like that on. I've been there when they've run stuff like that on the engine data. Usually, I think Mahovitz has the highest power output. Either Mahovitz or Mike Miller has the highest numbers there. They don't try to run really big stuff there. It's kind of hard on the dyno. K4 Jixer. I got about the same gas mileage on my truck after installing a turbo, a little less after switching to E85. It's cheaper. Evens out 9.5 pounds of boost made 509 and 583 foot-pounds on meth. 12 pounds now. Nice. That's a good combination. I really like E85. Alan, how's it going? Scott wants to know, I'd be interested in what you think a horsepower and torque would be for a Windsor base 408, 220 AFR heads, 13 to 1, 672. See, that's like a real cam. That's going to make good power. I'm thinking that should be 700 or something. Alva wants to know who sells a good gear drive for an old school 327. I don't know if Comp does, but Pete Jackson was the one that we always went to. I don't even know if they're still in business anymore. Yeah, Admiral, it's Mohovitz. It still holds the record for the 4.6. But I don't know if he's made as much as Miller has with some of the big block stuff. Harper Michael, what NA power would you expect from a 408 LS with CNC ported rec ports, high RAM, 249, 263 cam, 114. So that should be, I'm thinking that's going to be 660 or 670 NA. 1400 horsepower is going to come pretty fast with very little boost from that combination. K4 Jixer, more hydration. That's what the world needs. Brad, you've run some GDI stuff on liquid propane directly through the pump. That's pretty cool. I've never seen that. Admiral stepping up again. Remember to hydrate with the water meth setups. I really want to do more water meth testing. I like it. It kind of threw me back when we did the testing with the distribution, but I'd like to do more of that stuff. It works pretty well, but I'd like to see, because I know a lot of guys are using it out on the street, and I'd just like to do more testing with it. I'd like to see more distribution in different kinds of manifolds. Tony has a 2002 CR1500 with a 5.3. What's a good daily cam for it? Either the torque cam or something similar that BTR has, other guys have them, or a stage 1 cam is what I would put in a 5.3. Aaron, what's up? Julius, we have LPG gas. The gas station where I go to has all kinds of cool stuff. That's where I go get the E85. But they have propane and LPG and all kinds of stuff. So it's really pretty cool, and it's not that far away from West Tech, which is nice. Error number 419, SS2 cam and a 6-liter LY6, 706 or 823 heads. The 823 heads will make a lot more power than the 706 heads will. The 706 heads will make more torque down low, below 4,000. But an 823 head will make a lot more power than a 706 will. I've never messed with propane injection. Aaron wants to know what heads you like for a turbo 302 small block Ford. Either one of those 11R heads are really good, and you won't go wrong going with the bigger head in that instance, because then you have room to grow and it won't hurt you with torque production or anything. So I would go with the bigger one. Link 550 wants to see a shootout and spend $1,000 on a 5.3 and a 5.7 Vortec, which makes more average power. For $1,000, the 5.3 will win that, because it's starting out with a much better cylinder head. And to give you an idea, if we run those stock, a stock 5.3 makes about 350 or 355, and a stock 5.7, a good one, will make 310 before we do anything to them. So it's already at a pretty big deficit, even though it's bigger. And if you put cams in them, the 5.7 never catches it unless we can put a head on the 5.7. Alan wants to know GM or aftermarket lifters for the LS. We've run a lot of stuff that are Sealed Power or Speed Pro. They're the ones that the guys from FelPro sent us. And we've run also lots of stock ones. But again, the stuff that I'm doing on the engine dyno is not the same as what people are doing out on the street. We don't run it for 100 or 200,000 miles. So I haven't seen any lifter failures other than one on a 4.8 but it had 300,000 miles on it, and we'd beaten the heck out of it with all kinds of compound turbos and all kinds of stuff. So I don't think that was really a lifter problem. I think that it just like aged out. But we don't run them the way that you guys do on the street, and we don't see that on the dyno. Admiral wants to see, can we see water only versus water meth versus just meth? My dad does water only on his nitrous 632 and does a 463 eighth mile. That's pretty fast for an eighth. That must be a really good 632. That thing's making some real steam. I think what you would see doing water and water meth and meth is, I don't know how big of a difference you'd see in the power. You'd have to readjust the air fuel running the meth, either if you did it with a carburetor or fuel injection. You'd have to readjust for the amount of meth that you're spraying to make the air fuel the same as the others. And then my guess is what we would really see is if we could then change the timing for those to optimize the power, then you could see more of a gain. Maybe, I don't know. The meth itself might add power. I don't have a lot of experience other than the water meth stuff that we've run on these various boosted applications. Max Rally 39. What is it? REBs or rubies? Jay White wants to know, small block Chevy Canfield 220s good for a turbo setup? Yes, they are. Tyler wants to know, is there any interesting information when you mess around with the Ram Air stuff? Yeah, we did mostly chassis dyno stuff with that. The funnest thing I think that we did a lot of blower stuff, and but the coolest thing we did was one of the guys that we know, local guys, had a Grand Am, and we did a turbo kit on the Grand Am, and we just routed the exhaust up and took the hood off, and we ran it on the dyno like that. And we did it old school. We did it like with an FMU, and I hooked a fuel pump up, and we put race gas in it and didn't change the timing. And, so that was kind of fun. I wish we would have been able to tune the computer so that we could actually make the turbo kit work, because we definitely needed to take timing away. But at 7 pounds, it did pretty good. Error number 4. I have about 2 minutes left. Error 419. Have you had success replacing spun cam bearings in junkyard blocks? We don't replace cam bearings in LS blocks. Maybe other guys have. Usually when a cam bearing spins in an LS block, we throw the block away and just get another one. We haven't done that. We've done spun bearings in other blocks and other engine families, just not the LS. Jose, I'm building a Forge LY6 turbo for an 08 TBSS. Would you recommend stock LS3 heads or a nice set of aftermarket rec port heads? If your goal is 800 to 1,000 at the wheels, you can get that with a stock head very easily. The one thing that's nice about aftermarket LS heads is that they have much thicker decks, so they're sturdier than a factory head. But in that power level, you're probably not going to run into any problems. I would surface them so that they're smooth and the RA number, and that they have the surface for a real MLS head gasket. Same thing with the block. It will seal, put good head studs on it, and away you go. And if the tune is right, you won't have any problems. We've run literally hundreds of runs at the 900 to 1,000 horsepower level with lots of different LS motors, and they'll just keep doing it a lot, even with stock internals. Joshua wants to know, on a sloppy stage 2 cam, or should I recommend spending extra money on a brand name cam? I wouldn't think so much about the brand name part of it as you would with different valve events and different camshaft, different cam specs, because there are lots better cams than a sloppy stage 2. If you take a look at the video where I did the 6-liter, we ran that Comp 469 cam. That cam makes more power than the sloppy stage 2, and there are lots of others that do that as well. So you can make more power with a better cam. I don't care whose name is on it. You can get it from lots of different places, Summit or Comp or BTR or Texas Speed or any of these guys. Cam Motion, I love Steve out there. Those guys are great. So don't think about it as a brand name cam as much as it is a different cam than the sloppy stage 2. LS The World, twin 6766s for a 427. No, if those are real like Garrett size turbos, then those will work. Those will make that power level. If that's the limit of your power level, you can do that. If you want to go more than that, then you can go up to 70s or 72s or something and have a little bit extra in reserve. Max Rally's dishing out those rubies, I guess. Rubles. Turbo John, does does a 2-inch carb spacer help air distribution or horsepower on an EFI 4150 intake? That's a good question. We do carb spacers a lot on single planes, and sometimes it does stuff and sometimes it does nothing, no matter how big we make it. I think Freiberger did a test where they stacked a bunch of spacers and went a little nuts on it, which I think is awesome. But we've run spacer rotations because we have 4 holes and tapered combos and reverse tapered combos and divided and all kinds of crazy stuff. We have phenolic ones and Wilson double throwdown ultra billet ones. And again, on single plane intake manifolds, on dual planes, you usually see a change because especially if you put an open spacer on a dual plane, it changes what the fundamental characteristics of the intake manifold a little bit. On a single plane, it doesn't do that. It just adds plenum volume and can change the signal to the carburetor, which can be a big thing. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And then on a 4150 throttle body, you throw out the signal from the carburetor altogether. So if it did change the signal to the carburetor and improved it or made it worse, and you saw a change in power, you don't see that anymore on a 4150. It only changes the plenum volume. And I guess you can make an argument that it might change the angle of attack for the air and things like that. But like I said, all I can tell you is sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. What I can tell you is we've done lots of testing with 4150 intake manifolds that are the same as a 4500, like a Dominator size flange. And so when we take a Dominator, we've done that multiple ways. So we run the 2 intakes, and usually the 4500 Dominator flange intake makes more power. Then we take a 4150, either a carburetor or a 4-hole throttle body, and put it on there, and it also makes less power. And we're talking about 1,000 CFM 4150 throttle body versus a 4500 throttle body, which obviously flows more, but we don't see a big change in vacuum in the manifold. So it's not just airflow, it's where the air is going. So like a 4500, the airflow is attached to the outer walls. So I think that there's something there for where the air is going and not just how much air is going there. Yes, Turbo John's channel is awesome. So if you guys haven't taken a look at it, make sure that you go take a look at it because he does very, very cool stuff. Yes, I have to get going also. I'll take one more question and then I'm out. Outhausen 5000. Rotaries. Yes, I do like rotaries. Let's see. I want to find a good question. Okay, we'll end with a water meth question. I'd like to see some Scott Gaines. I'd like to see some testing on water meth distribution with different nozzle locations, top, bottom, side of the discharge pipe, some different and some applications where nozzles can make a difference. And lots of people want to see on the water meth, they want to see pre-turbo and post-turbo, although I wouldn't do a post-turbo between the turbo and the intercooler. I don't think that that's a good idea. I would do it after intercooler if you had one. If we didn't have one, then post-turbo is fine. I don't like blowing stuff like water or water meth into the turbo just because I don't think it's good for the impeller, but we could try it on the dyno. It's not going to hurt anything. And if I hurt a GT45 turbo, then I'll spend another $163 on it anyway. But it will be interesting to see if, and the thing that I don't know is if we do it farther away from the port, basically, are we giving it more time to cool? Or are we actually gaining something by having the turbo impeller chop up all the water and make it really fine particles? I don't think that that's really happening. I think it's actually more of a distance thing. But it is spinning very fast, and it can affect, obviously, the water droplet size, possibly, I guess. But that's all more testing for another day. Thanks for showing up, guys. Thanks for all the help. I will see you on the next video. And I don't know when it is. I don't know if we'll be doing this tomorrow. We will just have to see. But obviously, we'll send out notices if we're going to do that. Make sure to go watch the video that we just put up so you guys can comment and say, hey, look, this cam stuff is just all bogus. And that Richard guy doesn't even have any idea what he's talking about. See you guys.